On the implications of the Canada-China preliminary joint agreement on Canada's electric vehicle sector. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and all the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation. Either floor, English or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I would like to welcome for our first panel, Dr. Charles Burton, Senior Fellow, Synopsis. He is joining us by video conference. Welcome. We are also joined by Brian Kingston, President and Chief Executive Officer, representing Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Welcome. And our third witness in person is David Adams, President and Chief Executive Officer, representing Global Automakers of Canada. Welcome to all of you, and thanks a lot for appearing before the committee. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will go into our round of questioning. And we will begin with Dr. Burton. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes. Mute yourself. 1 second, we can't hear you. What?
We can go to Mr. Kingston and we'll try.
Oh, we will go to Mr. Kingston while the technicians figure out about Mr. Burton. Mr. Kingston, please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that working? You can hear me okay? Excellent. Well, Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for the invitation to appear today as part of the committee study on the Canada-China preliminary joint agreement on Canada's electric vehicle sector. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, CVMA, is the industry association representing Canada's leading manufacturers of light and heavy-duty motor vehicles. Our membership includes Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. CVMA members have been operating in Canada for over 100 years. They're responsible for most of the auto production in this country, having built over 100 million vehicles since 1945. Today, CVMA members are the largest employers, investors, and innovators in the auto manufacturing sector in Canada. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis are leading the transformation to electrification. General Motors and Ford are the top EV sellers in Canada, while Stellantis is the only manufacturer building PHEVs and EVs in this country. The CVMA is concerned with the Canada-China agreement that reversed the China surtax orders and allows 49,000 Chinese vehicles into the market. That's equivalent to 30% of the total number of EVs sold in Canada last year, a significant number. The agreement has the potential to undermine Canada's auto sector and presents risks to the future of the integrated North American auto supply chain for the following 4 reasons. Number 1, level playing field. China does not adhere to many of the rules-based trade and investment principles that have been fundamental to the success of the auto industry and the Canadian economy. China's state-directed industrial policy has provided subsidies totaling US $230 billion between 2009 and 2023. Today, domestic EV manufacturing capacity exceeds demand by 3 times, with the surplus product exported and in many instances dumped in markets abroad. China's vehicle exports have grown from 1 million units in 2020 to 6 million in 2024 and are on track to achieve 9 million by 2030. Chinese manufacturers have a cost advantage due to weak or non-existent labor rights that have suppressed wages and artificially lowered the cost of production. According to analysis by Reuters, the estimated hourly wage paid at 30 Chinese auto companies is between 14 yuan, that's about $1.93 US, to 31 yuan, which is about $4.50 US. In comparison, CVMA members are unionized, with production assemblers paid an average hourly wage of $44.52 Canadian, plus generous pensions and benefits. Secondly, security risks. In 2024, Canada committed to banning Chinese connected vehicle software and hardware to protect Canadian drivers from foreign actors manipulating these technologies. The Canada-China agreement is incompatible with this commitment. Clarity is needed on the federal government's position on the risks posed by Chinese connected vehicles to Canadian drivers. Number three, the interaction with EV mandates. The federal government announced 3 months ago that the EV mandate would be repealed. In September of last year, the federal government announced that the 2026 model year targets would be paused. Despite these announcements, nothing has happened. The mandate remains in place today. Under the EV mandate, Chinese OEMs could earn up to $980 million per year selling compliance credits. This is an incomprehensible outcome at a time when manufacturers are already under significant pressure from US tariffs. And finally, the importance of US alignment. The CVMA strongly supported the federal government's China surtax order that levied that 100% tariff on Chinese manufactured EVs because we must align ourselves with the US approach to China. We cannot be out of step with our largest trading partner on China as we approach a very sensitive time with respect to the review of our CUSMA agreement. There is simply too much at stake for the auto industry and the broader Canadian economy if we are perceived by Washington as being out of step and misaligned on how to deal with China. Thank you for the opportunity to address your committee, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kingston. And we will go back now to Mr. Burton. Mr. Burton, please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me now? Wonderful, wonderful. There are profound scientific research and national security implications of the Canadian government's recent concession allowing heavily subsidized Chinese electric vehicles into our market. In September 2024, I testified before the Commons International Trade Committee that Chinese EVs represent a critical security threat to Canada. The previous month, the U.S. National Security Advisor at the time, Jake Sullivan, speaking in Nova Scotia, urged Canada to exclude Chinese EVs from North America, citing, and I quote, issues associated with data security, with critical infrastructure, and with the underlying questions of national security. Extensive research by Britain's Royal United Services Institute, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and numerous allied government agencies have produced emphatic warnings. These vehicles are effectively spy machines on wheels. Their integrated cameras, sensors, and GPS systems can easily camouflage sophisticated spyware and malware. For example, in 2019, the United States moved the Transit Infrastructure Vehicle Security Act to ban the purchase of China Railway Rolling Stock Corporation subway cars because of technology in the cars that could allow for data harvesting, secret recording of conversations, surveillance of individuals, and sabotage of critical U.S. transportation infrastructure. It was found opening and closing of railcar doors could be manipulated from Nanjing in China. In late 2025, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense issued a formal directive banning staff and troops from discussing sensitive information while inside Chinese manufactured electric vehicles, citing credible fears of data harvesting via built-in cellular connections. Canada previously recognized these risks by banning Huawei and ZTE from our 5G networks in 2022 to prevent Chinese regime infiltration of our telecommunications networks, and by terminating a 2020 contract with the Chinese state firm Nuctec, known as the Huawei of airport security, for embassy X-ray scanners. We were going to put in 170 embassies and consulates with that equipment. Fundamentally, China does not have private sector commercial enterprises as we understand them. Chinese corporations are legally obligated to support state intelligence apparatuses. The regime can compel manufacturers to embed spyware into their vehicles and leverage massive state subsidies to flood Western markets with EVs at prices below production costs. They sell these vehicles cheaply because the primary return on investment for China's integrated regime is geostrategic, not financial. In August 2024, the Government of Canada announced a 100% surtax on Chinese EVs, which was to, and I quote, help level the playing field for Canadian industry and workers. However, I argued then, and I still believe now, that Canada should have implemented an outright ban of Chinese EVs on security grounds, as we did with Huawei, ZTE, and Nuctec. Utilizing prohibitive tariffs to keep Chinese EVs out of Canada instead of a security-based ban inevitably invites diplomatic complications. Shiny, affordable, and high-tech, a cutting-edge $30,000 Chinese BYD with superior battery technology is undeniably attractive to Canadian car buyers compared to the pricier Canadian-produced competition. Consequently, I predict intense public pressure on the government to go beyond the 49,000 figure to allow in as many Chinese EVs as necessary to satisfy Canadian consumer demand. The darker concern is how these EVs, governed by sophisticated software that can be manipulated remotely from China through updates, might be weaponized for destabilization. We must consider a scenario, for example, where cities and transportation arteries are suddenly paralyzed by legions of immobilized Chinese vehicles. Chinese EVs pose a security threat to Canada, maybe not today or tomorrow, but certainly when the time is right, for example, as when China goes to war with the US or our allies. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, the excellent interpreters of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Now we will go to Mr. Adams for 5 minutes. Mr. Adams, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the committee today on behalf of the 15 members of the Global Automakers of Canada to discuss the important topic of Chinese electric vehicle entry into the Canadian marketplace. For context, the GAC member companies employ 110,500 people in Canadian dealerships, vehicle assembly plants, national and regional offices, captive finance companies, and transportation and logistics facilities. The activities of GAC member companies support an additional 107,000 jobs across the country. The activities of GAC member companies contribute more than $24.9 billion annually to the Canadian GDP, and these activities generate more than $10.6 billion in government revenue annually. At the outset, it's important to underscore that all auto distributors in Canada are importers. While 5 companies manufacture in Canada, the vast majority of their production, 85 to 90%, is destined for the U.S. market, and most of the vehicles sold in Canada come from somewhere else. For GAC members, the U.S. supplies 18.3% of the vehicles our members sell here. Mexico supplies almost 24% of the vehicles we sell here. Vehicles from elsewhere around the globe is 43.4%, and Canada supplies, Canadian manufacturers, Honda and Toyota supply almost 15% of the vehicles sold here. This reality underscores the importance of having a fair, transparent, and rules-based environment for any new entrants, Chinese or otherwise, looking to distribute vehicles in Canada to ensure a competitive marketplace for all. Some of the measures contributing to a fair and transparent rules-based environment include adherence to Canadian motor vehicle safety standards and Canadian emission standards, supporting consumers by ensuring vehicles sold can be repaired and serviced at a physical service location, mandatory participation in industry MOUs, principally with Transport Canada, that existing vehicle manufacturers abide by as a means of achieving regulatory outcomes through alternative mechanisms, and mandatory in a myriad of industry programs and dispute resolution processes. Committee members will recall that the 100% tariff on EVs, including conventional hybrids, as well as battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, came into effect on October 1st, 2024, via an order in Council referencing Section 53 of the Customs Tariff to address unfair trade practices that adversely impact trade in Canadian goods and services. The RIAS supporting the OIC at the time indicated concern over China's non-market support for its electric vehicle sector, which could lead to an exponential surge of imports that could adversely affect the transformation and planned investments in Canada's vehicle sector. It is also worth noting, as others have mentioned, that Canada has not yet established any regulations similar to the Information and Connected Technology and Services for Connected Vehicles regulation that was implemented last year in the United States. This regulation bans vehicle connectivity systems and advanced driving systems technologies linked to foreign adversaries, with the software ban coming into place for model year 2027 and hardware bans being implemented from model year 2029 to 2030. This would seem to be another area that Canada should explore further to ensure that both personal information and privacy, as well as cybersecurity and national security, can be safeguarded. The announcement mid-January of the government's intentions to allow 49,000 EVs into the Canadian marketplace, a quota that will increase each year, would seem to discount the initial rationale for imposing the tariff in the first place, and also represent an initial irritant, as others have commented on, to the U.S. administration at a time when we are heading into a sensitive first review of the USMCA. While the quota represents a small portion of overall Canadian sales, as Brian mentioned, it represents 30% of EV sales, and it remains unclear if this action will achieve the policy goals of providing Canadians with more affordable EVs and encouraging joint venture production of vehicles in Canada, which presumably would be reviewed under the Investment Canada Act. Clearly, the greatest value added for Canada would arise from utilizing Canadian supply chain for parts and components, as well as Canadian labor. All issues are linked in the automotive industry, and this decision has ramifications for environmental policy, trade policy, industrial policy, and national security. From the perspective of the members of the Global Automakers of Canada, it is important that Canada establish the appropriate guardrails now with respect to any new entrants coming to Canada in order to ensure that a level playing field for competition and for the privacy and security of consumers purchasing their vehicles. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. And with that, we will begin our first round of questioning of 6 minutes each, and we will start with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'm going to begin with you, Mr. Kingston. Last week, you were quoted in the National Post calling it a massive risk to allow Chinese EVs access to Canada's market. You also said Canada's auto industry depends on our integration with North America and the U.S. specifically. That's been the foundation of the sector going all the way back to the Auto Pact. So, is it a mistake for Canada's Liberal government to be veering the country off course from this foundation?
Yes, it's a major mistake. And my colleague, Mr. Adams, referenced the fact that approximately 90% of Canadian automotive production is destined for the United States. That is how the sector has been designed. That is how it has worked. And that is why we've been so successful building the industry that we have. By taking a different approach to China, we put that integrated supply chain at risk. I've just come back from a week in DC, and every conversation starts and ends with China and a question to me as to why Canada has taken the actions that it did. So it is a significant risk, and it's an unforced error at a very sensitive time.
And based on the conversations that you've had, so what are the potential consequences of the Liberals taking Canada down this road from the U.S. towards China?
Well, the U.S. is moving to seal off the U.S. market from Chinese product making it into the States, or Chinese manufacturers incurring and gaining market share. So as the U.S. goes down that road, because of our integration, we need to work with them in that effort. By taking a different approach, we've presented now a risk, which I am assured will end up being an irritant in the discussions around the renewal of CUSMA. Typically, when you head into a review of a trade deal, you're trying to reduce irritants. We've introduced a vehicle size irritant onto the table.
Again, I mean, the success of the Canadian North American auto sector has always been based on the regulatory harmony that's existed between both countries. I mean, from the Auto Pact to the Free Trade Agreement to CUSMA. In fact, the Japanese ambassador to Canada recently indicated when he was interviewed by CTV that continued access to the U.S. market under CUSMA was essential for companies considering expanding vehicle production in Canada. And Honda and Toyota are two of the biggest auto manufacturers in Canada. So, Brian or David, can you comment on that? And what are the risks?
I think part of the risk is that through this action, as you say, it could potentially stifle other investment by existing players in the marketplace. And I think the other reality is that the aspiration of having Chinese manufacturing happen here is probably not likely to happen unless we get our borders sorted out. So this has to be a triaged exercise where we have our focus and attention on the U.S. and then look elsewhere. It's always good to have a backup plan, but we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, it's good to see you again. And I was on that International Trade Committee in 2024 when you first appeared. And in that meeting, you said, my judgment is the potential security threat trumps all other factors in the consideration of Chinese EVs. Just as we've banned Huawei telecommunications technologies from Canadian infrastructure, on the same basis, we should ban all imports of Chinese electric vehicles. Do you still believe that?
Yes, I do. And I think that advances in technology make this reality even more terrifying and a greater threat to Canadian security. I think a lot of Canadians really don't take this as seriously as they should, but we are getting constant warnings from our own security agencies and from security agencies around the world that the Chinese are using internet-connected devices, whether it's the EVs or concerns about Chinese software and water filtration systems or any number of what's referred to as the Internet of Things, to try and engage in effectively a hybrid war that could cause us grave difficulties if there is a kinetic war between China and the West. And, I think Canadians believe that war consists of blowing up buildings in countries far away. But when we find that our banking system no longer works, the cars don't run, and the water is undrinkable, then I think we'll realize that we're in a very different scenario in this modern age than previous wars.
Well, just following up, I mean, some nations have looked to ban the use of Chinese-made EVs for its military members and have denied military or access to military installations. Do you agree with these moves?
Yes, I think it's the right move. I think we should be doing the same. We already have some partial bans. I mean, government employees can't use TikTok because TikTok is one of these Internet of Things devices that gathers up data and tries to shape people's perceptions of China. And I think the same thing has to apply to EVs. And, as we know from other testimony, there are also concerns about forced labor in their manufacture of the aluminum. We got that from Margaret McQuaig Johnston when she testified.
I've just got a couple of seconds left. I just want to ask you this last question. It said last week the U.S. ambassador to Canada suggested that Canadians who buy Chinese-made EVs will not be allowed to drive them into the U.S. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that that's the direction they're going. And so you'll appear at the border with your EV and you'll be allowed to enter the U.S. The car won't. It's not just the ambassador. A number of people out of Washington are suggesting that this is what will happen. So, they'd only be for Canadian domestic use.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Baljanelli. Now we'll proceed to MP Rana for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for your valuable time. And also, I will start with you, Dr. Burton. The government has described this arrangement as an opportunity to attract Chinese venture investment into Canada's EV supply chain. In your view, what does Canada need to get right for that to work?
Well, I think there are concerns about the Chinese EVs coming into Canada, that they'll be coming in as kits and will not be providing employment opportunities to Canadian auto workers. I know that my former superior in the Canadian Embassy in Beijing, Guy Saint-Jacques, suggested that we could have them come in under Canadian rules, and that perhaps by year 10 we could have the Chinese EV manufacturers using Canadian produced parts. I frankly, based on my experience in China, I don't think that China will abide by our rules fairly. We've seen this time and time again where China has not done that. And I think the idea that China would agree to BYD manufacturing EVs in Canada using entirely Canadian sourced products is extremely unlikely. So I'm not optimistic about this or how we can make it work.
Dr. Burton, China's own industrial priorities around EVs have been shifting recently. How should Canada be factoring that into how it thinks about this arrangement going forward?
Well, I'm concerned about Chinese EVs coming into Canada under any conditions. They are grossly subsidized by the Chinese government. I think the estimate is something in the order of since the past 10 years, 300 billion worth of Chinese subsidy, which makes them very competitive. And I think that there are concerns about the labor practices and environmental practices of lithium extraction in the Tibetan regions, as the chairman of the executive director of the Canada-Tibet Committee, Sherab Tershin, testified to the Commons International Trade Committee. And I think also concerns about the use of forced labor in bauxite extraction in the Uyghur regions. And so these things are quite serious barriers in terms of other aspects of Canadian law. And can we accept products of forced labor or products of environmental and labor practices which are unacceptable under international practice and Canadian law? This is a matter which I think is really a barrier to fulfilling our commitment to the Chinese government to allow the 49,000 EVs to enter Canada in the initial phase and then more in subsequent years.
And Mr. Kingston, the government has put forward several measures to support this automotive sector alongside this arrangement. From your members' perspective, what are the most pressing needs the sector has right now?
Well, the biggest challenge facing the automotive sector in Canada and auto manufacturers remains access to the U.S. market. As I noted at the outset, the industry has grown because we have free trade with the United States. So as long as those tariffs remain in place, there will be significant costs driven to auto manufacturers. At a time when the industry is under such pressure, introducing new market entrants from China who do not compete on a level playing field adds a whole new risk to the sector. So we're looking for government to level the playing field and make sure that if manufacturers are going to compete with new market entrants, it's on a set of rules that everybody abides by. China does not play by those rules, and therefore that's a huge risk to the sector.
Canadian vehicle manufacturers being most competitive in the EV transition, and what role does this arrangement play in that?
Well, manufacturers have already invested billions of dollars into the EV supply chain in Canada. As I noted, Ford and GM are the EV sales leaders in Canada. Stellantis is the only manufacturer currently building EVs here, and of course has recently finalized a major construction of Canada's first large-scale EV battery plant. So we have the ground being laid for an emerging EV sector. The challenge that we're facing right now is a lack of demand from consumers. But we still believe that the future is electric, and you'll see more and more manufacturers shifting into that space. But we've got to work with government to try and make the supports available to help consumers switch. So charging infrastructure, recently announced incentive, the EVAP program will help, and we'll see higher adoption levels over time.
And, Mr. Adam, the automakers you represent are making long-term investments decisions right now. So what are the factors weighing most heavily on where they choose to locate EV production?
Well, I think I would look at it and reframe it as electrified production. And one of the keys is, as Mr. Kingston mentioned, obviously, is having access to the United States market, unfettered access to the U.S. market. The other reality is the fact that we do share the same integrated auto environment, but we have the U.S. administration that's basically undermining all of its environmental and EV-related goals and objectives with respect to battery production and investments, so on and so forth. So when we're trying to sell vehicles or build vehicles in Canada with 80% of those going to the United States or more, we need to be building vehicles that Americans want to buy. So I think that's why our members, Honda and Toyota, have taken an approach where American consumers are quite interested in hybrids, but they haven't developed building fully electric vehicles yet. They need the market.
Thank you. Time is up, MP Rana. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Juncker for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Burton. Is Canada making a strategic error by seeing this arrangement as a simple trade deal?
Yes, I think that it is a strategic error to agree to this. I mean, the terms, it seems that the idea was that we would accept the 49,000 EVs and subsequently more in future years in exchange for relief on the canola seed tariffs that China had imposed. But the canola seed tariff relief only runs from March 1st until the end of the year. So we've made a permanent commitment to allowing in the Chinese EVs in exchange for a highly temporary one. I think that for the canola producers, they do not necessarily support that we make this kind of deal. I think for them, as I've spoken to some of the officials involved in the canola industry, that they'd really prefer not to be dependent on the Chinese market and to make as much as 75% of the canola's seeds into biofuel so that they're not subject to these vagaries over and over. They had it when we held the Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou on a U.S. extradition request, and now then they had it again when we imposed 100% tariffs on EVs. They have enough trouble with looking after the climate and the soil conditions than having to deal with arbitrary and punitive action as China weaponizes trade to serve China's geostrategic interests.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Given that Chinese businesses are subject to national security laws in China, can we really exclude the possibility of seeing exploitation of data by the Chinese authorities?
No, I think that we cannot, and I think that more and more of the Chinese algorithms are very specific. So the concerns that were just raised in the question with regard to the military would be highly valid, and I do think that the concern is over software updates and putting in backdoor routines into these vehicles. And when you're looking at millions and millions of lines of code, it would be very difficult for the communication security establishment to keep on top of whether these EVs are presenting a security threat. So I just despair about this. China is an integrated regime where business is expected to respond to the Chinese Communist Party, who are a state military business integrated approach, who have an overall geostrategic plan to become the dominant power in the planet by the year 2050 under Xi Jinping's Community of the Common Destiny of Mankind. And I cannot think that their strong desire to have EVs running in Canada is not part of their overall foreign policy and defense agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We know that EVs collect sensitive data like location, people's driving habits. So do we need to consider these vehicles as being potential vectors for the collection of strategic information?
Yeah, so I mean, the EVs would be able to pick up the license plates of EVs of vehicles roundabout. In other words, know where you've been going, where you've been parking next to. They also can gather information about infrastructure. I mean, China doesn't allow Teslas, for example, to enter into military and government spaces for the same reason, and they provide extensive information about the driver, and we have concerns about whether they can be used for gathering for listening in on communications through the Bluetooth applications in those EVs. So I think there are any number of reasons to be concerned about them. They are like cell phones or spy machines on wheels. There's no question about this. And the idea that the Chinese state would not fully exploit the possibility of that advantage strikes me as extremely unlikely. Whether we're able to solve it through installing, say, BlackBerry software into the cars or not, I don't have the technical expertise to speculate on that. But I really feel that that this is a mistake from the security point of view and could have very serious consequences for Canada's security in years ahead.
So, Mr. Burton, we can't guarantee data security, and we can not guarantee the absence of forced labor in the supply chain. Are we facing a major strategic risk for Canada?
Yes, I think we are. The Chinese government has, I think, just last week initiated legislation that makes it illegal to transfer information abroad about supply chains, and also they have legislation which punishes companies that are withdrawing from China under foreign pressure because of supply chain concerns. So, for example, not allowing the executives of the companies to exit China until the legal issues are with regard to whether they are doing it for foreign reasons are resolved. So I do think that there is no good solution to this, and the best solution is to ban Chinese EVs from entering the Canadian market for security reasons. I mean, I agree fully with what the other witnesses have said about these other significant factors. I think it's unfortunate that the Carney government has made this decision. It appears to be that we are giving up on our previous concerns over security and foreign influence and transnational repression and defense of Canadian diaspora communities, with a view that we can gain significant trade advantages. But I mean, let's face it, our total external commodity trade to China is 4%. Even if we are able to raise it to 6% by the year 2030, as the government proposes, it will not make a significant difference to the concerns that we have over what the U.S. may do to our economy.
With that, now we will start our second round, and we will start with MP Ho for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions is for Mr. Kingston. Just last week, the Prime Minister said that our historically close U.S. ties have now become a, quote, weakness, and suggesting that Canada should look elsewhere. From the standpoint of Canadian auto jobs and supply chains, is importing Chinese-made EVs a credible substitute for the North American auto market?
No, absolutely not. And, I'm an economist by training. Our trade relationship is always going to be with the largest economy that is geographically closest to us. We happen to sit beside the largest, wealthiest, most dynamic economy in the world in the United States. Our relationship with the United States will never be a weakness. It is our biggest strength. There's no doubt that we're going through a difficult time right now as we deal with this administration. But to suggest that we could somehow diversify away from the biggest economy that we sit right beside, that is not economically feasible. And China will absolutely not be a replacement for our auto industry and the access that we have to the U.S.
Economist. Previously, it was said that Canada should be the best destination in the world for auto investment. Does the Liberal government's decision to import more Chinese-made EVs make Canada a better place to build, or just an easier place to dump product at the expense of Canadian auto jobs and supply chains?
It makes Canada a worse market for automotive investment. We are very fortunate to have 5 companies that have invested in this country and employ hundreds of thousands of Canadians throughout their supply chains, their dealer networks. By allowing Chinese companies into the market with no footprint, no investment, who don't play by the rules, that undermines the manufacturers that have invested in this country. So this agreement makes it far worse. And because it threatens our access to the U.S., there could be very little justification for any new investment in Canada if you can't guarantee that you can get your product into the U.S. market.
Thank you. My next set of questions are for Mr. Burton. So, Mr. Burton, the Prime Minister last week said that Canada's, quote, close ties to the United States have become a weakness that we must correct, end quote. In your view, is replacing dependence on the U.S. with deeper exposure to Beijing-linked EV technology actually a correction, or just swapping one vulnerability for another vulnerability, which this government is not adequately prepared to address?
Well, I think that, one has to look at the difference in the nature of the two governments. I mean, the Chinese government has an agenda which is hostile to us. It routinely violates the norms of the international rules-based order and presents a security threat in the South China Sea and to democratic Taiwan, as well as to Canada through the weaponization of trade relations. So the United States is a country which is based on the rule of law and democratic legislature. And we have recourse in the U.S. courts if we feel that the United States has not been abiding by trade agreements fairly, whereas China does not deal fairly or reciprocally in any way. So I believe that Canada should be strengthening our relations with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, with the Nordic nations, and with Europe. I mean, our total external commodity trade to Europe plus the rest of the UK is, I think, about almost 3 times as much as we do with China.
Another follow-up question for you, Dr. Byrne. Previously, you have warned that Beijing will, quote, continually try to buy our silence. So if Canada banned Huawei from key infrastructure because of security risks, why would any government who wants to protect Canadians invite Chinese-made connected vehicles onto Canadian roads, onto Canadian neighborhoods, and potentially near our sensitive infrastructure? What does it say about the Liberal government's judgment that it would still cede and negotiate away access for our EV market in the name of so-called trade diversification?
Yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of trade diversification. It looks to me as if what the government is doing in exchange for agreeing to Xi Jinping's demand to Mr. Carney earlier that Canada not engage China openly on our non-trade concerns. These are violations of human rights, influence operations, espionage, and so on. That it seems that the main advantage is to certain Canadian businesses which have close commercial relations with Chinese Communist business networks. So you're looking at the recent visit to China by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Champagne. That's the Minister of Finance, not the Minister of International Trade. And he brings a number of insurance companies and banks, including Brookfield National Asset Management. And after all those days of meetings, we haven't received any information from the minister about how this benefits Canada as a whole. So
maybe.
But yeah, I'm happy to talk about this extensively later.
Go to MP Noor Mohammed for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here. You know, I remember a time when my Conservative colleagues across the way were cheering when Stephen Harper oversaw and, in fact, stood with glee as Huawei signed an agreement to provide telecommunications integrated services in Canada. I remember when, in 2014, the Harper government signed a customs agreement. And I don't hear that. I don't hear those concerns. In fact, I also remember the 31-year FIPA deal that the Harper government signed in 2014. So it's interesting to see my friends opposite now all upset that we are trying to do the best that we can to help create opportunities for Canadian workers. Brian, it's good to see Mr. Kingston. It's good to see you again. As always, how many jobs has the auto sector lost since Trump started imposing tariffs on Canada?
Total auto jobs are auto manufacturing are flat. Most of the job losses that have occurred are in the supply chain in auto parts and components. How many? I'm going off a recent RBC report. I believe auto supply chain jobs were down about 5%. How much
investment has been made by U.S. automakers in Canada in the last 2 years?
In the last 2 years, the total amount is $10 billion. That's a combination of the investment going into Oakville. So Ford is retooling that plant, of course, finishing the battery plant in Windsor and recent upgrades to the line by General Motors in Oshawa.
Organization, right?
That's correct.
Chang'an?
Chang'an, sorry.
Their JV with Chang'an in China?
In China, or their partnership? Chang'an. Yes.
this LEAP partnership. Do you have the same about the fact that your members are entering JVs with the very same types of manufacturers that we are concerned about bringing to Canada?
So every manufacturer that's wanted to gain access to the Chinese market has had to enter into a JV. That is how China has secured access to technology by making sure that they have JVs with these companies. I don't have a concern with that. What I have a concern with is if you're going to cut a deal with China, why is there no reciprocity in any of the agreements that we have done? We're opening our market without any conditions or conditionality on.
In fact, there are conditions around a whole variety of different parts of this, including around ensuring that the same types of security frameworks that were put in place by the Europeans are put in place in Canada. There are agreements to procure Canadian goods. I mean, how do we think about the auto sector in this country if we are entirely dependent on U.S. manufacturers alone? Should we not be looking at the world and bringing people here to manufacture as an opportunity for Canada and for Canadians?
Well, with all due respect, there are no conditions on security. We've been trying to work with the government since the 2024 announcement to put in place a connected vehicle hardware and software ban. There has been no progress on that. So there are no conditions there. When it comes to bringing investment into Canada, of course, the government should try and diversify, try to attract investment. But without access to the U.S. market, there is no business case for a manufacturer to come to Canada right now. A Chinese manufacturer would never put a plant in Canada that cannot access the U.S. market. We're too small.
Want the U.S. to buy cars made in Canada. You've already heard this directly from the President of the United States. Should we not be looking at optionality for Canadian auto workers and Canadian supply chains?
No, it doesn't make sense to build cars in Canada and send them to other markets around the world. You would never build a vehicle here and send mass volume to Europe or Asia. We need the U.S. market, so we better get a deal, or our auto industry will simply not be the size it is today.
The question I guess I would ask you then is, how do you negotiate in good faith with the U.S. administration that keeps changing the rules of the game on Canada? How do you, who represent, you represent the auto sector of auto manufacturers in this country, how do you negotiate in an environment where day to day the rules change? If you don't also look at ways to bring investment, to create opportunity for Canada and for Canadians, at the same time as increasing affordability for Canadians?
Well, I remain the eternal optimist on this. I think there is a deal to be had. I don't deny that this is going to be extremely challenging, but we have to remember Canada is the largest export market for U.S. auto, and it's not even close. U.S. sends more vehicles to Canada than Germany, Mexico, and China combined. We have something to offer the Americans. We just need to get to the negotiating table and start focusing on that bilateral relationship. But I believe there's a deal to be had.
You mentioned that there were no security requirements. Every car that comes in has to meet Canadian standards of security. C8, Pipeta both give us those tools, do they not?
Absolutely. There's existing rules around vehicle safety, and we have existing privacy rules. What I'm saying is we've yet to actually follow through on the commitment to match U.S. connected vehicle bans.
Now we will proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. MP Blanchet-Jonca.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je poursuis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to continue with you, Mr. Burton. The Prime Minister said that China was the most important threat for Canada. Do you think that we are going against our own evaluation if we are opening our sector of EV to this incursion of Chinese vehicle?
Yes, I mean, I agree with the idea that China is the greatest threat to Canada. I think, I don't think that they are a strategic partner. I think they're a strategic competitor or a strategic adversary, probably more correctly. And on that basis, I think that we have to be looking at the larger picture of the future and the increasing infiltration of the Chinese state into Canada, which could have very negative impacts on our own security position.
Merci, Monsieur Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I want to hear what you have to say. What is the message that we are sending to our allies? We recognize that there is a risk, but we are still going against that. So are we really protecting our own interest, or are we compromising them because we might have a short-term gain here?
I believe we are compromising our interests quite severely. I was concerned when Mr. Carney last January in the Great Hall of the People referred to the strategic partnership with Party General Secretary Xi Jinping present, and then referred to the New World Order. I think that sends a signal to the Chinese that we support their overall foreign policy agenda. And while in Canada we may feel that the strategic partnership is just a fine way of saying that we want to be recalibrate our relations with China. In China, they take strategic partnership very seriously and see expectations of Canada's collaboration with China's overall strategic purposes and goals.
Thank you. Is there any other experiences that we had, like Huawei, UTech, we thought about this? Are we not learning from our past errors and we are taking a risk that is maybe not calculated properly?
Yes, I agree that it appears the risk has not been calculated properly, and I'm similarly concerned about the police deal, the agreement between the Public Security Ministry and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which up to now, to the best of my knowledge, has not been made public. And I'd really like to know what sort of concessions we have made in that security area.
Up, and we will now proceed to MPG Ritter for 4 minutes, and then we will end this panel with MP Rana with 4 minutes. MPG Ritter.
Mr. Kingston, can the Canadian auto ecosystem survive a future with 25% tariffs while importing Chinese government subsidized EVs?
No, if the status quo maintains with no agreement with the U.S., persistent tariffs, as well as China gaining increasing access to the market, the manufacturing sector in its current size will be very difficult to maintain.
Thank you very much for that. The rest of my time I'm giving to Kurt.
Thank you, MP De Ritter. Yes, there are concerns about the Canada-China agreement of 49,000 Chinese EVs entering the Canadian automotive market and how it will affect the automotive market itself. As a member of Parliament representing London Fanshawe, there are small to medium-sized businesses that are part of the automotive supply chain. Close to London Fanshawe riding is the General Motors CAMI plant in Ingersoll and the current construction of a battery plant for EV vehicles in St. Thomas. For me, prior to being elected as a member of Parliament, I worked in the information technology sector, especially always on the onus of IT security, maintaining data security, and preventing data security breaches. Mr. Burton, you appeared at the International Trade Committee in 2024. In that meeting, you said Chinese EVs are potential spy machines on wheels. My question is, what do you mean by this? Can you please elaborate on the technical capabilities and the risks this exposes Canadians to?
Well, these EVs, like all EVs, have sensors, GPS, and internet connectivity. And so as they travel around, they would be able to detect what license plate numbers are nearby, understand infrastructure, and gather information on the driver, particularly where they're going and who they're going to see and all that sort of thing. So there is an enormous data gathering bonanza available to the Chinese regime through these EVs. And there's also the concern about software updates, that the EVs could be updated with malware or spyware that could cause their operability to be affected if the Chinese regime, in time of tension between Canada, sought to do so. So really, it's one thing to get EVs from a nation that doesn't have hostile intent towards Canada and is a like-minded partner. I would think of, say, Japan or Germany, but sourcing EVs from the Chinese regime poses just an enormous security threat to us in terms of their data gathering and subversion potential.
Are you surprised that the U.S. administration is not considering allowing Chinese automakers to open up joint ventures in the U.S., or that Canadians who buy Chinese EVs won't be allowed to enter the U.S. with those vehicles?
I'm not surprised because, the United States government seems to pay much more attention to the concerns raised by their security agencies, and there's much more information available to legislatures in the United States about this. And so I think the U.S. is doing the right thing in this regard. It's unfortunate that Canada is not abiding by the same concerns that are expressed by by the people who understand that this kind of technology and the threat that it poses to Canada.
Hear about the data and privacy concerns Chinese EVs pose to Canadians, but are there greater security risks to Western society? What are they?
Well, I think that we would be concerned about the potential of EVs to understand critical infrastructure through their data gathering. So, I mean, it's one thing about the privacy and, targeting, say, people who are in critical positions, the military and intelligence, if they make what I would regard as error of sitting down in one of these things. But there's also the gathering of infrastructural information, potential military information. They really are remote spy machines to facilitate intelligence gathering much more efficiently than human intelligence would be.
We'll end this panel with MP Rana for 4 minutes. MP Rana, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Adams, why are you fully against this policy, China EVs policy, while most of your members are pursuing partnership with Chinese companies?
Well, I didn't say that I was against what I did say is that we need to cultivate a fair, rules-based environment by which any new entrant, Chinese or otherwise, comes to the Canadian market. And right now, as I think the other witnesses and myself have outlined, we don't have that. I think in terms of other importers, everybody that is distributing vehicles in Canada is an importer per se, as I outlined in my testimony. So I think we all are unafraid to compete, but we need to compete from a level playing field.
And could you please speak to the joint ventures and the partnerships that your member companies have with Chinese car companies?
Well, I think as Mr. Kingston mentioned, pretty much every automaker has a joint venture, established with the Chinese. And not to repeat Mr. Kingston's testimony, but that's how, or the only way that the Western auto companies were allowed into the Chinese market was to establish a joint venture with an existing Chinese automaker. That was the IP transfer, the technology transfer, all of those things occurred. That's the way they entered the Chinese market on the premise it was going to be a growing and huge market, which it certainly is at this point.
Thank you. And the government has set fairly ambitious EV sales targets. What needs to be in place, infrastructures, incentives, supply chain, for those targets to be achievable?
Well, I think the initiative that the Prime Minister announced on February 5th about removing the EVAS, the zero-emission vehicle mandate, was important because it was challenging in terms of actually being able to achieve those targets, and that's been supplemented by a greenhouse gas emissions target, or replaced rather by a greenhouse gas emissions target. That will allow automakers, regardless of who they are, to achieve emissions targets in a much more flexible way while still driving the same level of electrification. We do need more infrastructure. There's no question about that. The incentives have certainly helped as well.
Mr. Kingston, global EV adoption has been growing steadily. How are the manufacturers that you represent thinking about their positioning in Canada relative to that broader trend?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, my internet was cutting in and out there. The manufacturers that CVMA represents are very well positioned. As I noted, they're the 1 and 2 EV sales leaders in Canada right now and actually building EVs in this country. The challenge that we've had recently has been a lack of demand. Now we're hopeful that with the return of the EVAP program and more investments into infrastructure, you will start to see an increase in demand, and the February sales figures looked encouraging. But that's been the fundamental challenge that we faced, is Canadians just aren't interested in large-scale electrification at this stage.
Uptake of EVs in Canada have been uneven. What do you think are the main factors driving that, and what would meaningfully move the needle?
The most important thing is charging infrastructure. We see it again and again in surveys of Canadians that they are concerned about their ability to charge their vehicle at home and to access fast charging infrastructure when they are taking road trips. As you see more EVs on the road, the throughput at these stations increases and actually can make the charging situation more problematic for drivers. So we need to address that. We have to give drivers the confidence that if you switch to an EV, it will be just as convenient, if not more convenient, than owning a gas-powered vehicle. We're not there yet.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
With this, this panel comes to an end, and I really want to thank all the three witnesses for appearing before the committee. And I will suspend the committee for a few minutes so that the witnesses for the next panel can take their seats. So the meeting is suspended. Welcome back. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And with that, for this panel, I would like to welcome our three witnesses. We are joined by video conference by Andrew McKinnon, Interim Chief Executive Officer representing Accelerate Canada's ZEV Supply Chain Alliance. Welcome. We are also joined in person by Mr. Daniel Breton, President and Chief Executive Officer from Electric Mobility Canada. And our third witness, also in person, is Mo Kabara, Chief Executive Officer from the Transition Accelerator. Welcome to all the three witnesses. All of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And after that, we will go into round of questioning. And we will begin with Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon, please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me to speak on this important study. Accelerate is an industrial alliance of key actors in Canada's emerging zero-emission vehicle supply chain. Our network of partners and collaborators includes critical minerals miners, battery producers, battery materials producers, vehicle parts makers, vehicle manufacturers, researchers, and labor interests. Since 2021, we have been working across traditional industrial segments in Canada to develop the strategies that will support more Canadian content in EVs built here in North America and sold around the world. Our research shows that building an EV supply chain and industry requires supporting both the production of critical minerals and materials, as well as supporting the EV market through demand-side measures like predictable adoption targets, infrastructure build-out, and the EV affordability program. Today, it is widely recognized in Canada and by our allies that highly concentrated global supply chains for critical materials, including battery materials used in EVs, present a significant and economic security risk. For some of the key material inputs used in an EV battery or motor, greater than 90% of the world's supply is produced in China. This means that even though Canada has the raw materials needed and the final manufacturing prowess, we are missing control over critical segments of this value chain. The economic opportunity to develop our EV industry and create jobs for Canadians must be considered with this context. It is essential that a strong EV industry in Canada, including a strong EV market, drives the demand to produce and process critical minerals and materials here. These are the same minerals and materials used to support our defense needs in advanced applications like power storage and drones. A limited allowance of Chinese EVs into the Canadian market must be paired with continued and effective supports for Canada's own EV industry. In particular, this means support for critical minerals and materials production. This approach would build the EV market, support public access to and understanding of EV technology, build up the materials supply side of our EV industry, and, with the right instruments in place, could facilitate technology transfer from the world's leading jurisdiction for EV and battery production. We are pleased to see that the government has made multiple commitments since the announcement of the new automotive strategy in February to support key actors in Canada's emerging EV supply chains. This includes over $162 million for 22 Canadian projects that was announced by the Minister of Natural Resources at this year's PDAC conference in Toronto on March 3rd. Other critical measures include guidance in the Strategic Response Fund on preserving intellectual property ownership in Canada, and Budget 2025's addition of $22 million to renew support for the Patent Collective. This diversified approach of trade and EV industry development must also continue to ensure that future deals to secure foreign direct investment from Canadian trading partners in the production of battery and EV include provisions that require investors to work with Canadian critical materials producers and clear timelines for the attainment of levels of Canadian content. We want to see an assurance that Future agreements on joint ventures in Canada for production of batteries or EV include safeguards that support the protection of Canadian IP, requirements for Canadian materials supplied at prices aligned with Canadian labor and environmental standards, and provisions to facilitate technology transfer to Canadian firms. Any future deal must aim to increase Canada's strategic independence and economic resilience. Develop a strategy to amplify and expand Canada's battery materials sector by coordinating with Canada's peers to share best practices, co-develop IP, and create market access for Canadian battery materials. Deploy a national IP strategy for Canada's critical materials producers that would fast-track patents in this space, especially those related to battery materials and materials production. Finally, this approach must continue to support Canadian firms in maintaining access to U.S. markets and consider long-term U.S. trading partnerships in the battery and EV supply chain. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And with that, we will now proceed to Mr. Daniel Breton for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci. Bonjour, mon nom est Daniel.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Danielle Breton, and I am CEO of Electric Mobility Canada, the association that has represented the transport electrification industry for the past 20 years. We have nearly 200 members, ranging from SMEs to multinationals. 20 years ago, only a few dozen people worked in this sector, and fewer than 20 EVs were on the road in the country. Today, there are 130,000 Canadians work in the sector, and there are 1 million EVs. Between 2035, about 360,000 to 600,000 people will be working in the sector.
Industry. In January 2026, he said, "We don't need cars made in Canada." An auto plan that counts on Canada signing a free trade agreement where we will have no automotive tariff with the current U.S. administration is wishful thinking at best. No country in the world has no automotive tariff with the current U.S. administration. I recently heard the CEO of CVMA say that, and I quote, "Diversification is not an option." Well, CVMA only represents 3 members, 2 of which would have been bankrupt without the $80 billion in Canadian and U.S. taxpayers over 15 years ago. Yet, these 3 car makers decreased their Canadian car production by more than 80% in the past 20 years. Has nothing to do with Trump, has nothing to do with China. That's why industry diversification is not only an option, it's the only option. While approximately 5,000 jobs have been recently lost in the Canadian automotive industry, 130,000 jobs have been created in the Canadian EV industry. OEMs such as Rivian, Lucid, Tesla now employ thousands of Canadians in manufacturing and or supply chain here in Canada, and yet they pay counter tariffs while other OEMs that are currently laying off workers still get tariff remission, which is unfair, especially since these OEMs are North American OEMs of the future. Because in the past, Canada followed very lax U.S. regulation for decades, Canada was ranked dead last in the world for the average fuel economy of its light-duty vehicle fleet by the International Energy Agency in a 2019 report. By rolling back regulation on EVs, GHG emissions, fuel economy, and even science, the current administration in the U.S. is creating the perfect conditions to slowly but surely kill its own auto industry. Trying to stop innovation is not an option. 40 years ago, that's how old I am, the automotive enemy was Japan. The Reagan administration then imposed quotas on Japanese imports. My uncle, who worked at Ford and then GM, and I worked at GM, wanted none of us in the family to buy a Japanese or a German car, saying that we couldn't buy a car from a country that we went to war against. Today, the auto enemy is China. And I sometimes hear the same undertone now towards the Chinese that I heard towards the Japanese 40 years ago. Just over a month ago, I went to China to see the Chinese EV world with my own eyes. Chinese electric cars are very technologically advanced cars, much more so than many cars from most traditional automakers. If Canada had decided to follow the U.S. in trying to go back in time with cars and trucks with old technology, our industry would have been doomed. The most laughable thing that I recently heard from an auto industry representative was the fear that Chinese automakers would come and copy our technology. We have a lot of catching up to do. Canadians want affordable cars. Yet, according to Auto Trader, the average selling price of a new car has increased by a whopping 57% between 2019 and Q4 of 2025, making buying a new car or truck very costly for Canadians. Traditional car makers have stopped offering subcompact entry-level gas cars years ago to Canadians, cars starting at a little more than $20,000. I recently went to Mexico, France, and China. In these countries, car makers offer affordable electric cars starting at a little more than $20,000, some of them made in China, but also made in Europe or South Korea or even Mexico. Why can't Canadians get them? The most affordable EVs offered here start at around $40,000. Today, Ford and GM import Chinese-made gas cars in Canada. The Lincoln Nautilus used to be made in Ontario. It's now imported from China, and its price has increased. Demain aura lieu le jour de la Terre.
Tomorrow is Earth Day, and I want to talk about this because there is a committee on science and research that should keep in mind that the science of climate is clear. We have to significantly reduce our GHG, and Canada has a lot of work to do. Chinese vehicles are a small part of the solution, but we have to work with everybody to create jobs here while we are lowering our emissions. Thank you.
Mr. Kabara, for 5 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee, for inviting me. I'm with the Transition Accelerator, and we are an independent organization, nonpartisan, focused on helping Canada win economically and geopolitically within the energy transition. So I'm going to start with a simple statistic that I actually found really difficult to believe at first. In 2020, China exported 1 million vehicles. This is not just EVs, everything. Last year, they exported 7 million vehicles, more than 7. A third of these were electric. That is the fastest automotive expansion in history. And at that scale, I think the question is not whether Chinese autos reach North American consumers. It's a question of when and how they do it, and how much Canada can control that direction and outcome, and how much it benefits us. The auto sector has lost more than half its production since 1999. We peaked around 3 million vehicles. Last year was about 1.3 million vehicles. And the EV's transition is the opportunity, I believe, to potentially reverse that trend. We probably won't make 3 million cars again, but we can capture value potentially equivalent to that economic activity, because Canada has the assets to help us win and help us compete in this EV transition. You know, we have the critical minerals. We have access to talent when it comes to battery technology and battery innovation. We also have access to, trade agreements that go beyond the U.S., even though the U.S. has been an anchor for the auto sector. So when the tariff question on EVs came up in 2024, we generally wrestled with this question, because given how deeply integrated the Canadian and the American auto production has been for decades, Canada couldn't afford to diverge too far from the U.S. position. But we were actually very clear. We released a paper on this in September 2024, where we said that staying behind tariff walls indefinitely wasn't a strategy either. Tariffs can buy you time, but they don't build competitive advantage. Something like the agreement we are here to discuss today was going to happen eventually. And the question now that we face is how to maximize the benefits and manage the risks. Earlier this year, the CEO of Ford in the U.S. was in discussion with the Trump administration about joint ventures with Chinese manufacturers. So this is the world's most protectionist automotive market, is also exploring its options. So Canada engaging now on this is a head start, and I think it's a smart thing to do, because otherwise we're going to be left out of the conversation. So the model of a structured joint venture is not new. It's actually how China built its own auto sector. It went from almost producing no vehicles to now having the capacity to produce half of the world's total vehicle demand. And China used that model deliberately to absorb that manufacturing knowledge and to build its own capability. And that is how you go from almost nothing to where they are today. And that logic, we're seeing it by global automakers. We're seeing it by Volkswagen, Toyota, General Motors, Ford, Stellantis. They are partnering and doing joint ventures with the Chinese automakers. And the question for Canada is whether we use that same arrangement, the same way China did, not just to let vehicles in, but to actually get something durable in return. That is what we call selective exposure. It means that you don't just let the floodgates open. You have selective exposure, so you can actually build and control. And you have to admit that, as Danielle was saying, they are the world-leading manufacturers on EVs. And with conditions that ensure that learning and investment can stay here, Canada can actually benefit as well. We've seen this with Thailand as well, where they've opened their markets, they removed tariffs on Chinese EVs, and they're now building vehicles and battery plants on their soil. So preferential market access is potentially a way to have that real investment happen in Canada. But we should be careful about what are we defining as investment, because it's not just the assembly of the vehicle that can add value, but it's also the batteries, the processing. So those joint ventures don't necessarily need to be at the assembly plant. They can be more upstream from that. And the second piece as well is that we're hearing a lot about the security concerns when it comes to Chinese vehicles. I don't think we should be completely dismissive, but one, we should be really careful. It's not like you're going to plug a Chinese vehicle into the grid and now China has access to a Canadian grid. It's kind of laughable, some of the things that we were hearing. But we should really be careful as well, because there are solutions. There are models that the Europeans are doing, right? So access to Canadian software on Chinese hardware made in Canada. There are creative ways that we can do this to make sure that we're dealing with legitimate concerns, because obviously China is not necessarily the best faith actor or the good faith actor that we shouldn't be careful on this. So I think right now with this opportunity, we can get the design of this agreement right, the confidentiality of the investment right, and this is not just a trade concession, which is why I think this is something that is very important for this committee to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will start our first round of questioning with MP De Ridder for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Mr. McKinnon, I'm gonna start with you because you focus quite a bit on critical minerals. And so I'm going to ask, it's a really critical time where we know the long-term value is either captured or lost with our critical minerals right now. In February, to the industry minister, emphasized the need for safeguards around IP and tech tied to Canada's critical minerals. If that IP, whether in processing, refining, or battery innovation, is developed or controlled outside of Canada, do we risk losing long-term value of our own resources?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, yes, I believe we would lose some control over long-term value should we lose that IP control. It's important in all joint venture agreements or any new trade partnerships around critical minerals to ensure that we protect homegrown Canadian IP and reap the most commercial benefit here.
Ambassador to China tell us that we need to allow Chinese investment into Canada for extracting our minerals. A part of that would be then having the intellectual property to extract those minerals, and then potentially the ability to sell us back our own resources at retail. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. That should be a model that we avoid. We need to find work with the production agreements to protect Canadian IP to ensure that we are adding value to minerals here in these complex value chains for batteries and electric vehicles.
I'm going to ask you, Mr. Breton, do you think that the Canadian manufacturers here in Canada are operating on a level playing field with Chinese EV producers?
Honestly, what I find concerning is when some people say, that the Chinese manufacturers have been subsidizing significantly, their auto manufacturing facilities and their capacities. The truth is that if you go back years ago, Japan was subsidizing significantly the auto manufacturing in Japan, and to help them come into Canada and the U.S. The U.S. has been subsidizing significantly their auto industry for decades. So to me, when I see a country like China subsidizing significantly their auto industry, to me this is just, they're doing what the Japanese, the Europeans, the Chinese, the South Koreans, and the Americans have done.
I'm just going to ask you, though, again, do you think that they're playing on a level playing field as the producers, considering, our jobs we have great benefits, we have great wages. probably not the same in the Chinese manufacturing. So I'm going to just ask again, do you
Okay,
think it's a
so-
level playing field?
So if you go to a manufacturing plant in China, right, automated. So the truth is that the future of the industry is not going to be so much on wages, and we are losing jobs in Canada, and it has nothing to do with Chinese cars or Chinese manufacturing. I mean, as I said, 80% car makers from the U.S., Ford, GM, and Stellantis, have decreased their manufacturing by 80% in the past 20 years.
Most
Chinese
of it,
car were not part of that.
most of it is automated, but there are still jobs remaining. What are the typical wages?
And that's my point. In the EV industry, while we have been losing jobs in the legacy auto industry, in the EV industry, we've been creating tens of thousands of jobs in the past 15 years. So this is a shift from, I would say, traditional jobs to new jobs in infrastructure upstream and downstream, which is a new kind of jobs.
So typically how it's been done is Chinese will create kits that bring into like the European market, and then you assemble those kits. So if that is to be done in Canada, then how would that create a downstream or an upstream environment with our local eco-manufacturing in automotive?
So that's why we have to make sure that joint ventures go beyond that. That's
Yeah.
the first thing.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about critical minerals and just extracting those minerals and sending them elsewhere, whether it's in China, the US, or wherever, this is the type of mistake that we've been doing for 300 years. You know, we cut the wood, we get the furniture done, we get the oil, we refine it elsewhere, the aluminum we've done. I mean, Canada's been doing the same mistakes for 300 years. So I hope we learn from our mistakes, and the critical mineral segment, I think, is a very important opportunity for us to refine our critical minerals here.
I absolutely agree that we need to focus on, you know, being strong at home, and our resources in that are to, and
And I would go
resilient
beyond
abroad.
that, if you don't mind. Right now, when we talk about a critical mineral strategy in Canada, we don't talk about battery recycling, which includes critical minerals. And right now, most of these critical minerals at end of life of the batteries is being exported to the U.S.
A key component of that, though, is ensuring that we have Canadian IP and Canadian tech and Canadian innovation as well. So we're not only supporting our minerals and the refining of that, but we're also supporting our own innovation at the same time. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. How much time do I have, Chair?
28 seconds.
I'll just leave it there. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. And we will now proceed to MP McKelvey for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, MP McKelvey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'll start with Mr. McKinnon. So we know the number of EVs that is sold around the world has been increasing. So is it fair to say that this is a trend that's going to continue, and there's a considerable opportunity that can be seized here?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it is a considerable opportunity for the Canadian economy and Canadian workers.
We just launched an EV affordability program that will create incentives for up to $5,000 for battery electric and fuel cell vehicles, up to $2,500 for plug-ins. So what can we anticipate that will happen? Will that help the sales in Canada to increase?
Yes, thank you for the question. Very supportive of the EV affordability program. We've already seen the impact since it opened up for intake in the last month. Critically, it is a predictable program with a predictable wind down. I think this can't be understated. We're very supportive of having this program in place and clearly signaling to the public, consumers at large, when it will be wound down. I think it's 2031. Also, Accelerate had made comments regarding the EV affordability program in the fall around Made in Canada provisions, and we're very happy to see a provision for Made in Canada vehicles not being subject to the MSRP cap. Hopefully, in the near future, we're going to see more vehicles that get to come in under that provision and receive that incentive.
Mr. Kabara, did I say that right? Okay. We have a national charging infrastructure. How important it is Earth Month, how important is that we are pushing forward an effort to electrify so that we can move towards an EV future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. Mainly, I would say, is because it's going to save people money in the long run, right? I think like EVs will save a lot on fuel costs, And I think that it's one of the examples where if we imagine a universe where climate change did not exist, carbon was innate, we would still be driving electric vehicles because they're just a more efficient, more superior technology. And in that sense, like Ethiopia, 6 out of 10 vehicles new are electric. Why is this? Ethiopia is one of the lowest income countries in the world. They're doing it because they're saving $4 billion on fuel imports with a foreign currency that they want to save on. So I think that charging infrastructure is a critical piece of the equation because you need it to be there for people to feel comfortable to adopt the technology, and they don't really make money unless enough people adopt the technology. So you can break the cycle by having a stronger role for public funding to help it kind of just prime the market so that it can be self-sustaining.
Thank you. And Mr. Breton, you spoke about the need to invest into transition. If the world wants to buy EV, and we just heard great examples of the market and where the market is going, can you speak to the importance of us undergoing this shift and how, while right now we will be importing, we can transition into making them here as well? Can you really talk about kind of that transition and why you spoke to us being an early adopter and why it's important for us to be an early adopter, and if we don't have the bulk of vehicles right now, why this could help us to get there?
I mean, one of our members is Unifor. So we have auto industry workers within EMC, and we've always been very keen of the fact that we need to create jobs in the process of fighting climate change. So when we started seeing the federal government being invested or wanting to invest in the transition to electric vehicles, what a lot of people talk about is exactly what you just said, is a lot of people talk about auto assembly, but they forget about upstream, critical mineral, mining, refining, and then assembly, yes, and then downstream, charging infrastructure, electricity production, recycling, research and development. Some of the best researchers in the world come from Canada. So you have Dalhousie University, who does great work in battery research and technology. Hydro-Québec does great work in Quebec as well. Some of the best battery technologies like LFP batteries and NMC batteries, some of the IP comes from Canada. So there is great opportunity for Canada to become a leader. But the truth is that right now China is ahead of everybody else. I would say that South Korea is not far behind. But the truth is that if we don't, I'm glad that the Prime Minister decided not to follow the U.S. into killing everything related to the EV industry, because they're going clearly in the wrong direction. But one thing I'm really concerned about is the fact that while some car makers are really embracing the transition, some others are fighting it. And I will tell you that they will have what we call a Kodak moment. We don't want to be a part of that.
So we are on Science and Research Committee. I know it doesn't always seem that way based on the questions you got. I get it. But this is the Science and Research Committee. Yeah. So if we bring it back to science and research, given what you just said, Mr. Breton, what are the sorts of investments we should be looking in to make with our academic institutions, with our partners, not just so we're thinking about, a year from now, but really so we're thinking 5, 10 years from now?
The National Research Council of Canada is also a member of Electric Mobility Canada. They invest significantly in battery research, battery technology. They work with partners around the world. And some of it is on safety, and some of it is on cold climate, because, as you know, we live in a cold country. So I think that if we can focus on what we are very good at, we can be a reliable partner around the world.
Thank you. And we will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Joka for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to these witnesses. These 40,000 vehicles could represent up until a quarter of the vehicles, VEVs. Is this going to make the Canadian and the Quebec automobile sector more fragile or less? I don't think it'll make it more or weaker because the first vehicle that we're going to see are not the ones that are made by Chinese in China. It'll be Volvo, Tesla, and vehicles that we already had for years and years now. And right now, there are car makers like GM who sell electric vehicles in electric vehicles made in China. So those BYD cars that we were talking about right now, they're not going to happen here. And in your opinion, is that going to reinforce the Canadian auto industry? Well, if we accelerate the EV transition, we've got to go beyond upstream supply chain. The quicker we do it, and depending on where they come, because we don't have an assembly plant in Canada, or rather in Quebec, the quicker we do this, the more we're going to take Quebec electricity, and that means the less importation of oil. And in Canada, when you take your VE, you plug it in, and most of the electricity that is consumed in Canada is public electricity, and Quebec particularly. And it means that we keep more money here. So the majority, let's say, if the oil and tar sands don't belong to Canada anyway, and so the quicker we go to transition, the more we're going to keep our jobs and our money here. I totally agree with you on the transition. I think that Quebec gives the lesson to everybody. We see the number of VEs, EVs. Yes, most of the EVs are being bought and sold in Quebec. So you have talked about supply chains because they're not necessarily complete here in Quebec or in Canada, but these lower prices, does that mean that it's going to cost jobs in Canada in the future? I can't say that there are jobs in Canada right now in the car sector, and we have lost a whole bunch for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with China. As to supply chains, what we are seeing right now, some jobs were lost in the supply chain that had nothing to do with Chinese and had everything to do with Donald Trump. So sometimes they say, oh, the Chinese, and they would rather do business with the Americans. Canada is actually caught between a rock and a hard place right now. I understand. But these vehicles, are they actually really going to create a new demand, or are we just going to replace a production that could have been happening in Canada or in Quebec? So Chinese technology, or even South Korean, because let's not forget that the South Koreans are making excellent competitive vehicles. If you do the catalogs and you look at the Korean ones, they're very competitive technologically speaking. And right now they are actually beating the Japanese and the Americans. So the Chinese aren't going to change that to the point where there won't be any more Korean or Japanese sales happening. But of course, we need competition, because right now, affordable electrical vehicles that are sold elsewhere are not available here in Canadian soil. And that's a real issue, and for the consumer. And so when we say we're going to let in Chinese vehicles, well, why not let in European ones, affordable European one? When I was in France recently and I see a Twingo, 19,000 euros, I'm thinking, why can't we have that here? It's true. That's a really good question. And instead of concentrating us on a security risk with the Chinese, yes, what I'm trying to figure out here and ask you, is this agreement going to make Canada more dependent on foreign supply chains? Well, yes, we're always dependent that way. But what I can say is that I think that the wise thing to do, and the government has said so, is that we want to diversify our agreements with as many countries as possible and not put all our eggs in one basket. And they've talked about South Korea, they've talked about Germany, of China. I would like to see European agreements, France among other countries, for instance. I said about 18 years ago, my goodness, that we were far too dependent with the US when it came to cars and oil, and things have not improved. So we really need to partner up with as many people as possible. Well, this diversification with Korea, why aren't we dealing with Korea? And why are we taking a risk with the Chinese? Well, now you should ask the government that one. I don't have the answer to that. But they have signed a collaboration agreement potentially to have plants open up here. I hope that's going to happen. Because in the world that we live in right now, we really need to secure ourselves, yes, be resilient economically and less dependent. So how can Canada create public policies to develop this sector here in Canada? Well, I think the government is starting to do that. I'll tell you, the first time I came here to talk about electric cars, it was 20 years ago. And when I met the minister at the time, it was called John Baird. I think I would have spoken Mandarin to him. He didn't understand a single word I said because it was another technology, another industry, other times.
If you can quickly wind up in next 10 seconds.
OK. Donc, là, j'ai perdu.
So, I've lost my train of ideas here. Sorry. But I'll get back to it.
We'll start our second round of questioning with MP Ho for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions are for Mr. McKinnon. So, Mr. McKinnon, previously you have said Canada should pursue stability and reliability in its diplomatic partnerships. In your view, does importing near or fully assembled Chinese-made EVs make Canada's auto sector and auto supply chain more stable and reliable, or less so?
Thank you for the question. The quota amount of imported Chinese EVs, in my view, is a selective exposure to Chinese production that will facilitate stability in the growing EV market in Canada.
So, well, you have also spoken about the need to restore critical stages of the value chain within the EV auto sector. So, how does the Liberal government's current auto import policy, like allowing the import of near or fully assembled Chinese-made EVs, help Canada reshore anything? Does it chain?
Thank you for the question. In our research, looking at how Canadians understand emerging critical materials and battery value chains, what we understand is we need demand for our critical materials and critical battery production here in Canada. In order to have that demand, we need to grow the EV market. We need to grow the number of EVs on our roads. A selective exposure of a small number of Chinese EVs will help continue to grow this market. I agree with our other panelists. There are a number of other trading partners that can provide EVs to the Canadian market that will help grow this market. As we grow that market, we'll see more demand for our materials, and we can do the supports to build those materials and produce them here.
How many? So you said it's a small portion. How many EVs are being sold now in Canada?
Thank you for the question. I believe some of our other panelists today indicated that the 49,000 Chinese EVs would be about 3% of the total vehicle market, and based on last year, I think that's about 30% of the EV market.
The EV market. So do you consider that to be a small portion, or, I mean, 30% is a lot coming just from one country?
Thank you for the question. I think, as I've said, a selective exposure to Chinese EV production is going to help in the near term, as long as it's paired with support for EV production here.
Are you confident that the current deal would encourage EV production here?
Thank you for the question. No, I don't have an opinion on how the current deal encourages EV production here. What we see in this current deal and the auto strategy following it is support for critical materials production in Canada. I'm happy to talk about that wider supply chain upstream and where the battery materials investments have come in the last year.
Being mines, materials, minerals, manufacturing, all things that Canada is endowed with, but are being blocked by federal red tape, government red tape. But how does importing Chinese-made EVs that are either assembled or near assembled, which parts of the value chain are Canadians really capturing of this 30% of the market?
In those imported vehicles, we're not capturing the value chain. They're not built here. Having exposure and availability of advanced technology is important to develop a market that we would like to see will eventually be filled with Canadian materials. That's taking time to get online. We need to be building the market and supporting Canadians' access to EVs. This deal does that. At the same time, we build the capacity to build those products here, those batteries and battery materials here.
So Liberals announced recently their costly EV rebate program. It subsidized to tunes of billions of dollars EV sales in Canada, regardless of whether the vehicle is built here or abroad. And as you know, most EV sales in Canada are of EVs produced outside of Canada. Do you think this policy effectively forces Canadian taxpayers to fund billions of dollars to foreign auto manufacturers and foreign jobs while Canadian auto workers in the industry pay the price? Is there a better way of doing this?
Thank you for the question. With the EV affordability program, I believe this temporary measure with a clear pre-visible wind down will help Canadians access this advanced technology that is important demand for our critical materials value chains.
And we will now proceed to MP Deschamps-Terrien for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci. J'aimerais revenir sur la dernière.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to the last question that was given because she's with the science research. So according to you, what do you think that our research priorities should be when it comes to EVs? What do you think? Are there potentially any blind spots? What should we be researching? Well, I'll start with an element that I think that is not taken into consideration nearly enough when it comes to EVs in a cold country. We are a cold country. I remember when I was in government, I had made an agreement with California and Quebec to make sure that we collaborate on research and development. And of course, the California and the Quebec climate are vastly different. So I think that that is a really important element. Also, charging network off-grid, very important. And there's lots of research being done because it's not everywhere where you can have the necessary charging infrastructure or even electricity. So that's a really important element. There's also the batteries and the kind of research that's been carrying on for years in Canada, and we were among the world leaders in this respect. And recycling of batteries, we need to invest in that far more. I've spoken about that already. The mineral strategy, the critical mineral strategy with British Columbia, Canada. And right now, everybody seems to have forgotten that critical minerals that is absolutely essential. We're talking about billions of dollars that are inside of batteries. We get at the end of life when you need to recycle those batteries. And I don't know if you know this, even in Ontario, there's life cycle that went bust, and another one in Quebec went also dismantled. And everything is being transferred to the US, recycled over there. So the critical minerals that are geostrategically and geopolitically very, very important. What are we doing? We're giving them for next to nothing to the Americans. And I think that this is a huge strategic error that needs to be corrected.
Yeah, so in 2024, we actually did with a collaboration with Accelerate, a battery innovation roadmap, and we articulated their 50 action items for Canada to double down on its leadership on battery innovation. So on research more specifically, the example that was given for Dalhousie is where we have a potential, opportunity there. There was a battery research center there that was established. We think there's an opportunity to do that in Waterloo. There's an opportunity to do that in BC as well. So we kind of articulated specifically universities where you can establish essentially battery lab infrastructure that can be accessed by some smaller companies that are working on battery innovation. So I think that is one of the things that it would be very helpful to the ecosystem.
Est-ce que vous avez quelque chose à ajouter,
Mr. Did you have anything to add?
Thank you for the question. Battery innovation is one of our strengths in Canada. Working to capture the value from the innovative researchers in battery and battery materials across the country is a significant and important next step in gaining the benefits from an EV production industry here. This strategic approach, and Mr. Cabrera described it effectively, our battery innovation roadmap details some of the ways that we can work to support the financial ecosystem around battery production, physical assets for R&D, skills and labor, scaling up, and IP protection. I've spoken a little bit about IP protection today, and I think any deal with any trading partner related to EV production or battery production here in Canada needs to consider IP protection. Thank you.
And to finish off, Mr. Breton, we need to be rigorous when it comes to science. I've heard a lot of hyperboles. What are the elements that you would like to clarify, or would you like to rectify about what you have heard during the various testimonies today? Well, because what people seem to be saying is that these electric vehicles are spy vehicles. Connected vehicles, all vehicles are connected, whether they're gas powered or electric. That's the first thing to say, because I felt that people were saying is that if you have a gas car, no problem, nobody's going to follow you, nobody's going to know anything. But if it's a vehicle that's electric, everyone's going to know everything about you. No, that's totally not true. And secondly, the real subject. Is that the real subject, or is it in fact, should we be setting up or updating our policies when it comes to data privacy and protection to consumers to make sure that people have real protection? I think that is perhaps everything that we have in terms of rights has not gone far enough. It's become obsolete. And
MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Si, M. Breton, je poursuis vers...
Mr. Breton, the zero emission mandate, which was abolished and then reintroduced in January, but with a progressive reduction. What is the impact on the adoption of electric vehicles in Quebec and when it comes to investments in the sector? Well, 2025 was a year that we can only qualify as chaotic, whether it be in the US with President Trump or even in the Canada, because the car makers didn't know which tune to sing to. In January 2025, the Canadian government said that there's not going to be any more rebate program, and then all of a sudden there's no money. So 3 days to turn around. It was very complicated for the dealers and for the car makers and for the consumers. And what made things even more complicated is that people said, okay, the rebate will come back, and other people will say, well, I'm going to buy it soon. I'm going to wait for the rebate. So all of a sudden you found ourselves in a kind of the bottom of a wave that was ridiculously large for months and months because of all of these troubles and everything that happened in Canada and in Quebec also. So people ask me, well, what do you think is going to happen if the rebate program comes back? And I said, it's going to be a bit of a rebound. So instead of having an adoption curve that goes up and down, it's going to go like up and down. And that means it's going to be very difficult for people to forecast anything. Also, the price of gasoline from $1 to 70 to $1.80, $2, and that really made a complete mess around Canada and the world. And so I was talking to an auto dealer just this morning who said to me this morning, they won't have any more VEs because the prices have gone up so much. But a GM dealer was telling me, we're trying to get electric Silverados, and we can't even order them. GM doesn't want to take our orders, even though there's a huge demand. They do not want to give us an allowance so that we can even sell them. So when Brian Kingston says, well, there's no demand, no, that's not true. There's huge demand. It's GM that doesn't want to deliver any electrical pickup trucks, and that really worries me. Well, I really worry about the instability of public policy. One day they say this, one day it's 100% on tariffs, and then we lose face, and then we take away the carbon tax, and then we put back the credits for electrical vehicles. So this obviously has an effect on the inventories as well as the adaptation policies in sectors like this. Well, very quickly, the predictability is the key word. People say, we'd like to have certainty. No. There's no certainty. Death and taxes, the only things you can count on. Otherwise, you want to be able to forecast. You want to be able to predict things more or less. And as long as we can do this in advance, then we'll be able to manage.
With 4 minutes each for Mr. Holman and MP McKelvey. MP Holman, please go ahead. You will have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For London Fancha, there are businesses that are part of the automotive supply chain. For the constituents in London Fancha, creation of jobs and the opportunity for career advancements for better paying new jobs in the riding is a priority. There are concerns about the Canada-Chinese agreement of 49,000 Chinese EVs entering the Canadian automotive market and how it will affect the market itself. Mr. Breton, can the Canadian auto sector survive with high tariffs while importing a large number of subsidized Chinese EVs?
But you have to look beyond the traditional auto market, meaning that when we're talking about upstream, midstream, downstream, as I said, our industry, there was an EY report published last year, which stated that we should be between 360 and 600,000 jobs in the EV industry by 2035. Worst case scenario, 260,000 jobs. We currently are at 130,000 jobs. So as I said to people in the past, the jobs will change. There will be new jobs, and some jobs will disappear. We can't bring back Blockbuster. We can't bring back Kodak. But the truth is that as technology evolves, new jobs are being created.
Okay, so is it fair to say Canadian firms cannot compete indefinitely against state-backed losses? So what I'm saying is the possible losses of jobs with this new agreement.
Well, as I said, thousands of jobs have been lost in the past few years when it comes to the automotive industry. Tens of thousands of jobs have been created in the EV industry. So, to me, what I thought took a bit of time was the fact that the federal government, and I'm talking both conservatives and liberals, it took them a lot of time to understand that the EV industry was something happening. I mean, the Chinese were so far ahead of us. I remember going to the U.S. 10, 15 years ago, talking about critical minerals. They were not interested at all in what we were talking about until I started talking about national security. Because critical minerals, it also goes to defense, beyond electric cars or renewable energy. So now they get it. But because of that lag, China has took what they have, I would say, a lead of 10 to 15 years compared to us. So we have a lot of catching up to do. And that's why I think that now we've accelerated investment, we've accelerated the transition in jobs. We are working with colleges and universities to create these new jobs because honestly, in our industry, people are looking for qualified workers, and right now, in some segments, we can't find enough of them.
So in the last few years, the consumer demand for EVs actually has gone down. So by a month, it's gone back up?
Well, I mean, if you look between 2016 and 2026, there's been a dip in 2025 exactly because of what he said. But for the rest of the period, it's always gone up. So it's not because 2025 was a chaotic year that the trend is 2025. The odd year is 2025 because everywhere in the world, the trend is going up, except when people try to put toothpaste back in the tube, as we say in French. So now it will keep going up. It will keep going up. As I said, I'm talking to car dealers these days, and they're running out of cars on their dealers' lots. So to me, the issue is not about what happened in 2025. The issue is moving forward where we're going.
So just to confirm, you're saying car dealerships, there's the demand for EV, the supply for EVs is not as much as the demand. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But it depends on the car makers. Some car makers are more than willing to supply electric cars. Some others not so much. And honestly, there are a few car makers who do not want to do anything.
Thank you. For MP Holman, we will end this panel with MP McKelvey for 4 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just an interesting point. Mr. McKinnon said that we are building the market while we build the supply chain. Paraphrasing a bit, but essentially I think that's what you did say. I think a good example of that is the Nexstar battery plant in Windsor. I was there last summer. It was amazing innovation, amazing technology. They have now hired more than 1,100 workers towards their goal of 2,500. my question is, Mr. Breton, I just want to confirm. I think you said there's roughly 130,000 jobs in the EV sector right now. You're estimating that to grow to 360,000 to 600,000 by 2035. I guess my question is, do we know roughly the breakdown in that in terms of the jobs that are critical sector versus supply chain versus batteries versus assembly versus infrastructure? Like, is that all included in there, and how does that roughly break down?
Well, I don't have the numbers, off the top of my head, but I mean, we have our old report that was published by EY last year, specifically on that we could send you so that you can take a closer look at that. But it goes from the old supply chain, from mining to refining to assembly to R&D to charging infrastructure, electricity production, recycling. But I mean, it's a whole ecosystem that's being created right now in Canada. We have gaps. We have some catching up to do. But I mean, if we play our cards right, it could be a great industry for the future of the country.
Thank you. And Mr. Cabrera, so a lot of the arguments right now on why people haven't adopted EVs has been cost. So how is that changing? What is the delta now on a life cycle of a traditional fossil fuel powered vehicle versus electric? Like, have we closed the gap? How far are we? And are people starting to purchase them now because it's becoming cost effective?
Yeah, the other day I was actually just in Ottawa. I took an Uber back to the train station, and Uber was driving a Tesla. And I asked him, how long have you been driving an EV? And he's told me I've been driving it for 8 years. And trust me, I'm so happy right now that I'm driving an EV, not a regular car with what's happening with gas. It's interesting. Like, every Uber that I was driving EV is very happy. Why? Because they drive a lot. So the variable that is going to determine whether you actually save money, if somebody comes to me and they're like, I actually drive like 50 kilometers, maybe 30 kilometers a day, that's my commute, I'll tell them, well, maybe wait a bit until prices are a bit lower. But somebody who's driving 100 kilometers a day, 150 kilometers a day, they're going to save a lot of money, and that they're going to have a really good break. It depends where, right? Depends on the jurisdiction. But in Quebec, like, electricity costs are much lower. You're paying basically less than 10% of what it would take to fuel that car with gasoline, right? So if your gas bill is $200, your electricity bill is going to be less than $20 a month to drive the same amount of kilometers. So I think the idea there is that we're starting to see people actually moving to electric vehicles, especially with what's happening now with gas prices. There's a lot more predictability. You're using something that is a regulated rate of electricity, right? That has much more predictability longer term, whereas as we've seen with gasoline, prices can go up by 100% because of what's happening somewhere very, very far away in the world.
And Mr. Breton, did you want to add anything to that? And maybe, or finish your story about what it was like 20 years ago coming here versus now.
No, but honestly, there was a report published last week by Auto Trader that estimated that in March of 2026, the cost difference between a new gas car and a new battery electric car was less than $2,000 now. No, if you add less cost in maintenance, less cost in energy, so you catch up really quickly.
And that's without the rebate. So on top of that, you can add the rebate savings.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. So with this panel comes to an end, and I really want to take this opportunity to thank all the three witnesses. On behalf of all the members of Parliament, I really want to thank you for appearing before the committee and for your important testimony. And is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.